We live in an era obsessed with loud wealth. We track the rockets of Elon Musk. We analyze the metaverse ambitions of Mark Zuckerberg. We watch Jeff Bezos transform from an online bookseller into a spacefaring titan. These modern billionaires are celebrities. Their every move broadcast and debated in real time. They build things that capture the imagination: electric cars, social networks, trips to Mars. But if you look away from the bright lights of Silicon Valley and focus on the bedrock reality of the global economy, the systems that actually feed, clothe, and supply the human race on a daily basis, you realize that the loudest voices are not necessarily the most powerful ones. There is a dynasty that operates largely in the shadows of rural America, far from the tech hubs. A family that controls a fortune exceeding $250 billion. They hold more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American population combined. They don't build rockets. They don't own the town square of social media. They sell toilet paper, bananas, cheap t-shirts, and motor oil. They are the Walton family, the founders, majority owners, and guiding spirits of Walmart. To dismiss Walmart as merely a store is perhaps the single greatest error an economic observer can make in the 21st century. Walmart is not a shop. It is a sovereign economic state, with its own foreign policy, its own logistical army, and a GDP bigger than many European nations.
For 50 years, the Walton family hasn't just participated in the economy. They have actively redesigned it to fit their own specific blueprint. They dictated the terms of modern globalization. They broke the spine of traditional American manufacturing. They fundamentally altered how wages are set for working-class people, how inflation is managed by central banks, and what the physical landscape of your town looks like. Welcome to Econ History. Today, we are not just examining a retail fortune. We are deconstructing the machine that runs much of your financial reality. We will go back to the dust of post-war Arkansas to understand the mind of Sam Walton. We will look at the brutal efficiency of their rise, the devastation they caused to local economies, and their pivotal role in the rise of China as a manufacturing superpower. And finally, we will answer the crucial question: in a world built by Walton architects, how do you stop being merely a consumer in their system and start benefiting from the economic reality they created? This is the definitive story of the Walton Empire.
The Arkansas algorithm. To understand the current global supply chain, you have to understand the mind of Sam Walton in 1962. History often paints founders as brilliant visionaries who see the future. Sam Walton was not that. He was something perhaps more dangerous in business, a deeply frugal pragmatist who hated paying full price for anything and despised inefficiency with an almost religious fervor. Walton grew up during the Great Depression. That trauma imprinted on him a respect for the value of a dollar that borders on pathological. When he started in retail after World War II, running a small Ben Franklin variety store franchise in Newport, Arkansas, the established rules of retail were simple and rigid. The rule was, protect your margin. You buy an item for $1, you sell it for $2. The goal of the retailer was to maximize the profit on every single transaction. Department stores and small-town shops alike operated on this principle. They served a limited geography and charged what the market would bear. Sam Walton looked at this model and realized it was fundamentally flawed because it limited growth. He developed a counterintuitive thesis, what we might call the Arkansas algorithm. He realized that if he could lower his prices below everyone else, even if it meant making pennies on the dollar, he wouldn't just attract customers, he would annihilate his competition through sheer volume. He didn't want to make the most money per item. He wanted to make the least money per item, but sell more items than anyone else on earth. This was the birth of the everyday low prices philosophy. It sounds simple today as a marketing slogan, but in 1962, when the first Walmart opened in Rogers, Arkansas, it was economic warfare. Walton realized that small-town America was being overcharged by local monopolies. He knew that rural customers didn't care about fancy store displays or premium service. They cared about stretching their paycheck. He catered to a demographic that big city retailers ignored. But to make this model work, to survive on razor-thin profit margins that would bankrupt a normal business, Sam Walton needed leverage. He needed to buy goods cheaper than anyone else, and he needed to move them faster than anyone else.
While his competitors in the 1960s and 70s were focused on flashy marketing campaigns and prime real estate in major cities, Walton was obsessively focused on the unsexy back end of the business, logistics. Walton was famous for flying his own small prop plane over rural areas, scouting locations that seemed nonsensical to Wall Street observers. He would find the midpoint between several small towns and drop a giant box store right in the middle of a field. He understood that people would drive for value. By clustering his stores in regional blocks, he could service them from a single, massive distribution center within a day's drive. This was the beginning of the hub-and-spoke model that would come to define modern logistics. While other stores waited weeks for inventory restocking, Walmart stores were replenished almost daily. By the 1980s, this obsession with efficiency led to a technological revolution that most people entirely missed. Walmart wasn't a tech company, yet they became the biggest investor in information technology in corporate America. They built the largest private satellite network in the world, rivaling the Pentagon's capabilities, just to track inventory and connect their scattered stores to their headquarters in Bentonville. They were early adopters of universal product codes, barcodes, at a time when suppliers resisted them.
This technology gave the Waltons an unprecedented power: total information dominance. They knew exactly when a tube of toothpaste sold in Kansas at 2:03 p.m. on a Tuesday. That data didn't just sit there. It triggered an automatic signal to a warehouse in Missouri to put another tube on a truck. They eventually forced their suppliers onto a system called Retail Link. This was a masterstroke of power. It essentially told suppliers like Procter & Gamble, "You are responsible for watching our inventory data. When you see we are running low on your soap, you are responsible for shipping it to us. We won't even order it, you will just send it." Walton shifted the cost and risk of inventory management off his own books and onto his suppliers. He didn't build stores, he built a high-velocity distribution pipe. The stores were just the faucet where the money came out. Creative destruction and the Main Street Wars. As this logistical machine gained momentum through the 1980s and 90s, it triggered an economic phenomenon so profound it is studied by economists worldwide: the Walmart effect. It is perhaps the greatest and most brutal example of Joseph Schumpeter's concept of creative destruction in modern history. The expansion map of Walmart during these decades looks like a viral outbreak. Starting in the Deep South and Midwest, red dots began multiplying, spreading outward, consuming territory year by year. When a Walmart supercenter arrived on the outskirts of a small American town, it was an extinction event for the local economic ecosystem. For generations, local economies relied on a network of independent businesses: the local hardware store, the family-owned pharmacy, the downtown butcher, the independent clothing retailer. These businesses paid local taxes, used local accountants, and banked at local community banks. The money spent there tended to stay within the community, circulating through the local multiplier effect. Walmart severed that cycle. The local hardware store, buying hammers 10 at a time, could not compete with Walton's machine buying hammers 10 million at a time. The price difference was insurmountable.
Consumers, faced with stagnant wages and inflation, voted with their wallets. They chose the 30% discount over local loyalty. One by one, main streets across America were boarded up. The social fabric of these towns frayed as the town square shifted from the downtown gazebo to the fluorescent-lit aisles of the supercenter. Economists have debated the net impact of this for decades. Yes, consumers got cheaper goods, which is effectively a raise in their disposable income. But the destruction of local business capital and the replacement of independent business owners with low-wage retail clerk jobs fundamentally altered the American class structure. This brings us to the darkest pillar of the Walton fortune: labor. Sam Walton was notoriously anti-union. He viewed organized labor as an inefficiency that drove up costs and prevented him from offering his everyday low prices. He fought unionization efforts tooth and nail, sometimes closing entire stores rather than letting them unionize. The Walton model relied on everyday low wages to support everyday low prices. For decades, Walmart was the largest private employer in the United States, setting the baseline for low-skilled retail wages across the entire economy. Critics pointed out a grim irony that persisted for years. The Walton family was accumulating billions, yet their pay was so low that many of their full-time employees qualified for government assistance programs like food stamps and Medicaid. American taxpayers were, in effect, subsidizing the Walton family's payroll.
The globalization engine. If the destruction of Main Street was the domestic consequence of the Walton model, the hollowing out of American manufacturing was the international consequence. In the 1980s, Sam Walton famously ran a Buy American campaign. Banners hung in stores touting products made in the USA. But the relentless mathematics of the Arkansas algorithm made this unsustainable. The demand for ever lower prices clashed with American labor costs. By the 1990s, after Sam's death, the gloves came off. Walmart became the single greatest accelerator of corporate globalization in history. They didn't just participate in outsourcing to China, they practically wrote the instruction manual. Walmart used a power known as monopsony. A monopoly is when one seller controls the market. A monopsony is when one buyer controls the market. Walmart had become such a massive buyer that they dictated terms to the entire world. They would tell a longtime American supplier of, say, bicycles, "We need you to lower your price by 20% next year to stay on our shelves." The supplier would protest, saying American labor and materials made that impossible. Walmart's reply was simple: "Figure it out, or we will find someone who can." Walmart set up massive procurement offices in Shenzhen, China. They brought Chinese manufacturers up to speed on Western quality standards and logistics. They connected the vast, cheap labor pool of developing Asia directly to the shopping carts of Middle America. The result was the great trade-off that defined the economics of the roughly 20 years between the fall of the Berlin Wall and the 2008 financial crisis. American consumers got incredibly cheap televisions, microwaves, clothing, and toys. Inflation in goods remained shockingly low for a generation. But the cost was the American industrial base. Factories closed in Ohio, Michigan, and North Carolina and reopened in Guangdong Province. The Waltons leveraged global labor arbitrage better than any entity in history. They became the transmission mechanism that connected the paycheck of a factory worker in Shenzhen to the paycheck of a retail clerk in Kentucky, effectively pitting them against each other in a race to the bottom on wages. The Walton family grew unimaginably rich on the spread between Chinese production costs and American retail prices.
The dynasty adapts. Sam Walton died in 1992. Shortly before his death, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from George H.W. Bush, a testament to how thoroughly his model had conquered the American landscape. But the death of a founder is a dangerous time for an empire. The soul of the company shifted. The transition went from a founder obsessively focused on the customer experience in the aisles to a second generation, Rob, Jim, and Alice Walton, managing a gargantuan empire of capital.
For a time, Walmart seemed to lose its way. The stores became dingy, customer service suffered, the relentless focus on cost-cutting began to degrade the actual shopping experience. They faced massive class-action lawsuits regarding labor practices and gender discrimination. And then a new threat emerged, one that Sam Walton never foresaw: the Internet. For the better part of a decade, it appeared that Amazon would do to Walmart what Walmart had done to Main Street. Amazon was lighter, faster, and unencumbered by thousands of physical stores. Jeff Bezos was the new Sam Walton, using technology to drive prices even lower and convenience even higher.
Wall Street wrote Walmart off as a dinosaur. The stock stagnated for a decade. The narrative was that the Walton empire was destined to slowly crumble under the digital onslaught. But this perspective underestimated the sheer, brute power of the infrastructure the Waltons had built. They owned the land. They owned the distribution centers. They had a store within 10 miles of 90% of the U.S. population. Under new leadership in the last decade, and with the blessing of the Walton heirs, the giant woke up. They realized their physical stores weren't liabilities. They were forward-deployed warehouses that Amazon couldn't replicate. They poured billions into retrofitting their supply chain for e-commerce. They turned supercenters into fulfillment centers for online orders. They launched grocery pickup services that merged the digital and physical worlds perfectly for busy families. Furthermore, in our current era of high inflation, the Walton model has suddenly become vital again. When inflation strikes, consumers flee premium brands and run back to the lowest price provider. Walmart's monopsony power is now active again. In a world where suppliers are raising prices everywhere, Walmart is one of the few entities on Earth with the power to tell giant conglomerates like Procter & Gamble or Unilever, "No, we will not accept your full price hike. You will eat some of that cost because you cannot afford to not be on our shelves." Walmart has become a deflationary heat shield for its core customers. The empire is proving shockingly resilient.
The Walton blueprint for you. So here we are. The Walton family sits atop a $250 billion fortune. They have reshaped the globe. You can admire their business acumen, or you can despise their impact on labor, communities, and the environment. But what you cannot do is ignore them. They are part of the economic air we breathe. The question for the average person, watching inflation eat away at their paycheck, feeling the squeeze of the modern economy, is this: how do you benefit from the world they built? How do you stop just being a consumer in their system and start thinking like an owner of it? We aren't just talking about buying Walmart stock, though historically that has been a wealth-generating move. We are talking about applying the Walton blueprint to your own financial life. If you study how they built their fortune, 3 key principles emerge that are directly applicable to personal finance.
Radical frugality is seed capital. The first lesson is radical frugality. Sam Walton was richer than Caesar, yet he famously drove an old Ford pickup truck with cages in the back for his bird dogs. He refused to fly first class. He got his hair cut at the local barber. Why? It wasn't just an affectation. Walton understood that every dollar wasted on overhead, or appearances, was a dollar that could not be invested in growth. He understood opportunity cost better than anyone. Most people confuse high income with wealth. They get a raise and they immediately upgrade their car, their house, and their lifestyle. They increase their overhead. The Waltons built wealth by keeping their personal overhead virtually zero relative to their income. In your own life, radical frugality is not about deprivation. It is about amassing capital. Every subscription you cancel, every year you keep an old car running instead of financing a new one, every time you choose the cheaper alternative, you are acting like a miniature Walmart.
You are freeing up cash flow. That saved money is your seed capital.
Own the supply chain. Cut the middleman. The second lesson is a ruthless hatred of middlemen. The entire history of Walmart is a crusade to remove intermediaries between the factory and the customer. Every middleman takes a cut. Every middleman reduces efficiency. In your financial life, you are surrounded by middlemen bleeding you dry. High-interest credit cards are expensive financial middlemen allowing you to buy things you can't afford right now. Expensive actively managed mutual funds are middlemen taking 1% or 2% of your money regardless of performance. The Walton approach is to bypass them. Pay off high-interest debt mercilessly. That is a guaranteed return on investment. Utilize low-cost index funds instead of expensive managers. Be ruthless about efficiency in your personal financial supply chain. Don't pay anyone to do something you can automate or do yourself for free. Evolve from holding cash to owning assets. The final lesson is what the Walton heirs do with their money today. Through their family office, Walton Enterprises, they don't just let billions sit in a savings account getting eaten by inflation. They own things. They own massive amounts of real estate. They own equity in diverse businesses. They own world-class art. They own assets that hold value when the currency dilutes. The ultimate goal of the Walton system was to extract value from the global economy and convert it into durable ownership. To thrive in the current economy, you must shift your mindset from being a wage earner and a consumer to being an owner. You must use the savings from Principle 1 and the efficiency from Principle 2 to acquire income-producing assets, stocks, real estate, intellectual property, anything that pays you while you sleep. The Waltons redesigned the economic game to favor capital over labor and scale over localism. You cannot change those rules unilaterally, but by understanding them, you can stop playing the role of the victim and start playing the role of the architect in your own financial life. This is Econ history. If you want to understand the other hidden forces governing your wallet and your world, subscribe. We'll see you in the next deep dive.